Something I've been thinking about recently is how many bans there have been since the beginning of Scarlet and Violet OU, and the current state of Scarlet and Violet OU, and how it compares to previous generations. And I think there's been a more volatile scene this generation, where there are very many Pokemon that are ban-worthy and end up getting banned, and there are some Pokemon even now that are a lot more annoying, I think, and there are some people that say, for instance, Garganacl should be banned, or Roaring Moon maybe, because it can set up and sweep really easily. There are a bunch of annoying Pokemon as well, like Golden Go, that at the beginning of the generation, people were saying, how are you supposed to get rid of hazards when Golden Go is on the team? Right, the Golden Go and Glamora combo is really annoying. And I think that the metagame has settled down somewhat. But I think that the idea that you have all these Pokemon that can do these really annoying broken things still persists. And in previous generations, we had a more fleshed out Ubers tier, where we had a lot more legendaries at the beginning of a generation. Whereas this time we only started with the 2 legendaries, right? The 2 box legendaries was all Ubers was. And now Ubers actually has 10 Pokemon or 15 Pokemon, however many it is now. And most of those have come from OU, which means we've banned quite a lot. Whereas in previous generations, I don't know how much that was the case quite as much. So today I wanted to talk about why the OU tier currently has had so many Pokemon that were ban-worthy, and what makes the OU tier currently, and compare that to how it used to be. So this is what the usage stats look like currently in OU. And the first thing we note is that Great Tusk is on the majority of teams. But now this isn't too surprising. A bulky ground type being at the top of a list is really common for both OU and Ubers. If you have a Primal Groudon, for example, or Landorus, these Pokemon are just going to be very good because they can block Volt Switch, they have Earthquake, which is an extremely spammable move, and then they often have utility moves like Stealth Rock, Defogger, in this case Rapid Spin, and Great Tusk even has Knockoff for added utility. So generally these kinds of Pokemon are just great value for just about any team. And so there's nothing too surprising there. But then I want to go through the rest of the list here. We've got Golden Go, we've got King Gambit, we've got Iron Valiant, we've got, Dragonite. Those are some of the Pokemon I want to talk about. And so we'll keep this in the back of our head. So let's take a look at some of the Pokemon that we have in the OU tier. I'm going to start off with Garganacl. Garganacl is pretty representative, I think, of the problem that we're currently having in OU. So if we look at Garganacl's moves, let's just look at a standard one here. Look at the Stealth Rock set. They've got this Iron Defense set. I don't really think that's the best set currently. We can just put Curse on this. And Earthquake. Right, this might be more what Garganacl currently runs. Now, Garganacl actually has 2 things going for it compared to other rock types. The first one is Salt Cure, which is an extremely important part of Garganacl's kit because nobody's immune to it, right? There's no Pokemon that is naturally immune to Salt Cure in the game. There's no Pokemon is immune to Rock. And also, the chip damage from Salt Cure is extremely annoying. Now, if there were a Pokemon like Clefable in the game currently, Garganacl would be a lot less annoying. However, there's no really good Magic Guard users. In fact, if we look at the tier, Magic Guard, there are no Magic Guard users, right? We don't have Clefable, we don't have Alakazam even though Alakazam would not be really a good Garg answer. No Sigilif, again a bad Garganacl answer. No Reuniclus, and then all these are fake mons. So if we had Clefable, that would be something, but we don't have Clefable. So Pokemon are forced to run Covert Cloak if they want to avoid chip from Salt Cure. Otherwise, you're going to be taking, 1/8? Yeah, 1/8 or 1/4 of your HP if you're a Steel or Water type. And Steel or Water would be 2 types that would potentially want to come in and be Garganacl, right? Corviknight, Golden Go. bulky waters like Gastrodon, or like what's in the tier? Azumarill, I guess, or Dondozo. There's a good example, and those are the Pokemon that you'd want to bring in Toxapex and try to have sit on or beat Garganacl 1v1 if the Garganacl hasn't teared. And because you have Salt here, now all of a sudden they're taking a quarter of their health, which really is unsustainable. Like, that's a very significant chip damage that you're getting for free. So that makes Garganacl stand out. Then they did us one better and they said, hey, now we're going to give you Purifying Salt as this ability, which is going to mean that you resist Ghost and you cannot be statused. It's not even like Golden Go that blocks status moves. No, you just can't be statused. You can't have Toxic. You can't be put to rest. Or put to sleep. You can't be frozen. Right? That makes Garganacl still much better. And both of these things that Garganacl has, the Purifying Salt and the Salt Cure, those are unique things that only Garganacl and its pre-evolutions can do. So this means that if you want these really powerful abilities, you have to use Garganacl, which isn't a problem because Garganacl is, of course, primed and ready to use. Like, it is specifically built to use these abilities and be good with it. So having to use Garganacl for these abilities isn't necessarily the problem. What the problem is that nobody else has access to these options. So if I'm going to use Garganacl, that's a very unique thing that only Garganacl can do in the metagame. Excalibur has a sort of similar thing going on, where it has thermal exchange, which means it can't be burned, and gets a +1 if it gets damaged by fire-type moves, which really discourages a lot of fire-type Pokemon from doing their thing in the OU tier, and even Pokemon like Rotom Wash. They can't really beat Excalibur. I guess you could have Thunder Wave on your Rotom. But if you wanted to run Will-O-Wisp, now you can't touch Excalibur. It cannot get burned. It resists your dual stab, and you get a free setup on it. Pokemon like Clodsire aren't necessarily the most unique, because Water Absorb and Unaware, that's basically the same as Quagsire. And a bunch of other Pokemon have Unaware and Water Absorb. So that's not really that unique, but Clodsire does it uniquely well in having all the things it needs to have, right? It's a grounded poison type, it has recovery, and hazards, and earthquake, and toxic, which many Pokemon don't really have this generation, especially toxic. So Clodsire doesn't have anything that's unique to this gen, but especially given the limited move pool, it actually is somewhat unique nowadays. Golden Go, we've previously discussed, has this good as gold ability, which blocks status moves. In addition, it has a very good move pool with recovery and Make It Rain. So you can, this is the set I wanted. You can make Golden Go really scary with as good as gold ability, which nobody else has. Now Glimmora similarly has a unique ability in Toxic Debris, and Toxic Debris means if I'm hit by a physical move, then I'm going to set up Toxic Spikes on your side of the field for free. So I can use this as a suicide lead, or I could even use this as an offensive Pokemon, right? I could run Choice Scarf or Choice Specs Glimmora if I wanted to, and just attack you. But I'm still getting up hazards for free if I can position the Glimmora properly. Maybe it comes in on a U-turn, suddenly Toxic Spikes up on the field. I didn't have to do anything for that, it just sort of happened. King Gambit is next. It's got Supreme Overlord as an ability, which is really good in the late game, because if you've knocked out all my Pokemon, well, that's bad for me, but I'm also going to have an incredible power boost now, right? Stronger than a Choice Band boost. So I'm going to have a lot stronger moves, and I have Kowtow Cleave, which is a very good move as well. We'll just pull this up, right? It doesn't do much, but it's still just a really solid move. I think if King Gambit had knockoff, it would be even better. But you have the combination of Kowtow plus Sucker Punch, and in the end game scenario, this is quite good. A little less impressive than some of these other ones in terms of uniqueness, but it does have stuff going for it. Earthworm is another very unique Pokemon for two reasons. First of all, it's got Earth Eater, which means that it's immune to ground type moves, which is fantastic. for a steel type, and also it's got Shed Tail, which is one of the strongest moves for a team to have in all of Pokemon. Shed Tail is a very, very strong move, and before we had Cyclizar, who got banned from the tier 4 having this move, and people were thinking Orthworm wasn't that busted, but now people are looking at it and saying, well, Orthworm is doing the same exact thing as Cyclizar was doing. It's maybe a little bit harder, but it's still very effective, and maybe it actually is just Shed Tail that's busted and not necessarily Cyclizar. Next up, we got Walking Wake, which is currently being suspect tested. And Walking Wake is a very strong Pokemon because of one move, and specifically it's too new to have a move set. But it has one move, specifically Hydro Steam, which is very strong. You take a water type, you say, hey, you're going to get a boost in Sun. And a boost in Sun means that your water moves are going to be weaker. However, Hydro Steam actually boosts up in Sun instead of getting weaker, which is unique to any water type. No water type has had this ability before. So this really empowers Sun teams to go from spamming fire and grass moves to actually having water moves. Like imagine this versus Heatran, right? Suddenly Heatran is not an answer to a Sun team. In the past, sometimes you have Earth Power and Venusaur or other things, but usually Heatran would be a pretty good answer to a lot of Sun options. However, Walking Wake completely just obliterates that, because now you have a water type on a Sun team, which actually is stronger as a result. And it does have Flamethrower. And it's just a really strong option. Also, while we're here, we can mention Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is an interesting thing. Similarly with the electric one, where I have this 1.3 on my highest stat, or 1.5 if it's speed. Now, if I compare this to Beast Boost, Photosynthesis is not as snowballable. I can't just come in, get one kill, and then suddenly now I have another stat boost, and then I get another stat boost, and then I get another stat boost, and I just win the game and I sweep. However, Photosynthesis also doesn't require me to get a kill to sweep in the first place. I can just come in and get my boost, either because I have the Sun up, or for Quark Drive, because I'm in electric terrain. I can also use Booster Energy if I don't want to run a electric terrain or a Sun team, and I just immediately have that boost. So that's the difference between that and Beast Boost, and in some ways that actually makes this scarier. Sure, you're not going to continue to compound those boosts as you get kills, so there's not that sweeping potential. However, this does mean that immediately upon entering the field, I'm going to either get the benefit of a Choice Scarf boost, or I'm going to get the benefit of a free Life Orb boost on all my attacks, just because either I had the Booster Energy or I had the Sun or Electric Terrain up. And for Walking Wake specifically, because it also benefits from having the Sun for its Hydro Steam, it's a very strong option to have Photosynthesis, and that's a very unique thing that only the Paradox Pokemon can do. So again, we're following this theme of unique things that only they can do. Dragonite. Dragonite's an interesting Pokemon. This isn't a new Pokemon. Why is it on the list? Well, it has Multi-Scale, and Multi-Scale is a pretty unique ability that only a few Pokemon can have, and it means that I'm going to take half damage if I'm at full health, which gives Dragonite a lot of setup opportunity, usually Dragon Dance. More importantly, for this generation, Dragonite also has the move Extreme Speed, and with Extreme Speed and the normal Terra type, I have a move that is fairly spammable. Really, unless you have a Ghost type, you're not going to be able to block that. And I have moves like Earthquake for the Steel types and the Rock types. And then most Ghost types don't really want to deal with Dragonite, like Dragapult. You never know if I'm packing, an Ice move or a Dragon move. And even an Earthquake is going to hurt Dragapult really hard if I'm at +1 speed and +1 attack. So that's a bit of an issue right there. And I'm also a normal type, so I'm not weak to your Dragon moves either, by the way. And I'm immune to your Ghost type moves. So Dragonite being able to go for normal E-Speed means that he's almost always going to go first. He has the bulk to get set up to +1. This is a very unique thing that is more unique to this generation. In future generations, we probably won't have the terrestrialization mechanic, and then Dragonite will no longer run this set. But at least for the moment, this is another very unique thing. Pelipper is on this list because it's a rain setter, and being able to set rain is something unique. No other Pokemon currently can do that in the game, right? You don't have Politoed or even Kyogre. So Pelipper being able to passively set rain is very powerful. You'll note that Pelipper, before it got Drizzle as an ability in Gen 7, wasn't an OU Pokemon. It wasn't even an NU Pokemon. I believe it was PU, if I'm not mistaken. So to take a PU level Pokemon and launch it, skyrocket it all the way up into OU, and to have it be a recurring OU, UUUUBL Pokemon, just goes to show the power of rain and how useful it is to have a passive rain Pokemon. And Pelipper actually lost Defog this gen, so it doesn't even have the same utility that it had in previous gen, but it still is an OU Pokemon because it's able to set the rain. Another example of a unique mechanic. Hatterene is on this list as well. Hatterene has a few unique things, one of them being Magic Bounce, another one being Healing Wish. Healing Wish is quite unique in the sense that if you look at how many Pokemon get Healing Wish, how many Pokemon get it? Indeedee technically could run it. Gardevoir sometimes runs it. You don't want to be Healing Wishing Giblissy or Lomomola. And Lilligant, you don't want to be Healing Wishing that probably either. So really, Hatterene is one of the few Pokemon that actually would run Healing Wish. And having that option to just say, well, I'm done, and then heal up one of your Pokemon is really strong. I think another thing to consider with Hatterene is Trick Room. Trick Room is a more unique strategy that can be employed. It's not a new strategy by any means, but it's definitely one you have to be prepared for when you're team building. And Hatterene can also be one of the few good Trick Roomers in the OU tier or in any other tier that ends up being in. So now that we've talked about this, these unique Pokemon, right? We've got these Pokemon that can all do very unique things. And why did I harp on so much about things being unique? Well, if I were to try to build an OU team, I have a bunch of Pokemon I can choose from, but I have to be considering what my opponent could have. And I don't know what my opponent could have because this isn't a draft format. This is either the ladder or it's going to be a tournament game. In either scenario, my opponent can bring any number of Pokemon that are OU legal, which is, most of the game. And to be sure, most of the Pokemon that my opponent will bring are probably going to be in the OU tier. So if we look at these Pokemon, these are all the Pokemon my opponent could bring. That's, a decently sized list, but it's not the craziest list in the world. So why am I so... What makes this such a problem? Well, the problem is that what things do I need to bring so that I don't lose to my opponent? There are a bunch of specific archetypes of Pokemon that I can bring that will help me out. And I just want to list a few here. So the priority moves, that's one. I can bring moves like Mach Punch, Extreme Speed, to block my opponent from sweeping me with a +1 +1 Roaring Moon. That's a better example. Right? If they have a +1 Roaring Moon, they've already terrestrialized. I bring in Breloom, I Mach Punch, I kill it. Now we don't have that problem anymore. But I can't do that if I didn't bring a priority Mon with me. So maybe I want to have a priority Pokemon on my team just for that kind of scenario. I also probably want a Pokemon with hazards like Stealth Rock. Otherwise, I'm liable to get swept by a Focus Sash Poltegeist with Shell Smash, right? I want to be able to break Sturdy and Focus Sash, and also maybe deal with Stealth Rock weak Pokemon that maybe aren't running Heavy Duty Boots. Hazard removal is likewise important, especially if my team needs it. Hazard removal is really important, so otherwise your opponent could just set up 3 layers of Spikes, Stealth Rock, Sticky Web, and now all of a sudden, every time you come in, you're just regretting your decision to not bring a Rapid Spinner or a Defogger. I can also bring a Grounded Poison type, even if it happens to be something like Graphite, doesn't matter, as long as it can just come in and passively absorb T-Spikes. But not all teams have poison types at all, much less one that touches the ground. So that's something you have to consciously decide to do. Immunities. This is something that most teams should have. You should have a ground immunity because Earthquake is such a spammable move. You should have an electric immunity, block Volt Switch. Nowadays, a normal immunity is more important, right? Either you have something that's naturally a ghost or you have a Terra Ghost Pokemon. That way you can block both E-Speed and Rapid Spin if you need it. You can also bring a Dark type for Prankster immunity. If you're so inclined, Dark type of course is also immune to Psychic, but that's less important usually. But something for Prankster, that is something you could do. You can also have a Cleric like Blissey, something to heal your teammates. Nowadays there isn't currently any Pokemon with Aromatherapy or Heal Bell, so that doesn't really exist as such in the current metagame. But once or if those moves ever come back, that would be something. A Wish Passer is something else like Umbreon or a Vaporeon or Florges, something that can pass health to your teammates. Taunt is a big one, I think. A lot of times you'll see teams get swept on YouTube by Epic Magikarp Sweep LOLOL, and you'll think, well, if they just had brought Taunt, well then none of this would have happened. But how many of your teams that you run don't have Taunt? So you can hardly blame these people. I mean, you can blame those people because they're usually very inexperienced. But if your team doesn't have Taunt and then you're like, oh man, I wish I had Taunt. Well, there's so many teams out there that don't have Taunt. But it's a very valuable move, and it's something you have to consider running in case certain moves get brought against you, or certain Pokemon get brought against you. A Phaser, something that can roar or whirlwind out Pokemon as they try to set up, is also very valuable. But once again, are you going to run a Pokemon like Hippowdon that has a whirlwind or roar? Or are you going to even run on that Pokemon because that does take up a move slot? These are all hard decisions that you have to make. Another thing that you might want to have on your team is a regenerator Pokemon. Something like Amoonguss or like Toxapex. Just something to come in, take a hit, switch out once you know what your opponent's doing, and then getting some of your health back. It's a very valuable thing to have. You can also have a weather starter or a weather blocker. Maybe I'm running Pelipper for the rain. Maybe I'm running Pelipper just so I don't get swept by a sun team. That's definitely an option as well, although not usually a big one. But you could do that with like Tyranitar. That's a more common option. I run Tyranitar to bring in on the Alolan Ninetales so they can't get up the Aurora Veil. Finally, how about a pivot Pokemon? I'm going to have Pokemon that know Volt Switch or U-Turn. I'm going to have a Galarian Slowking or Slowking to have Chilly Reception. And in previous generations, you also had Teleport. And those moves can all get you momentum. As your opponent decides to switch out and go into a different Pokemon, well, maybe that Pokemon was going to be a problem for what you currently had. So you can just instead get momentum and bring out a bigger, scarier threat for your opponent to have to deal with. So there are so many options, and you can't fit them all onto one team. So many options for you to bring, but you can only have 6 Pokemon, and each of those 6 Pokemon can only have 4 moves. And given the current types of Pokemon, right? Is it a ground type? Is it a water type? You may not want to have a team that's completely weak to one type. And given the Pokemon that are currently available and the moves that are currently available, you might be in some awkward positions where certain roles that I just mentioned aren't available for your team. In which case you'll be stuck not having any Pokemon with Volt Turn, or you'll be stuck with not having a Wish Passer and your entire team is just getting slowly whittled down by a stall guy. And you're saying, man, if only I had some way to heal up my teammates, then we could just sit on him too. Maybe you decided not to bring hazard removal because you're playing in the NU tier and the hazard removal options are very limited there, and you decided you didn't want to bring an Oricorio or whatever, right? There are certain archetypes that I listed that you may not have brought, and you could say that certain things are more important than others, and I would agree with that. And you could say that given the state of the current metagame, this particular Pokemon is imperative to bring on all your teams. And there's some truth to that, I suppose, but I do think that you want to be able to bring a variety of Pokemon, and having to be forced to run one Pokemon just so you don't lose is a little bit annoying, I will say. Even though we can see, of course, from here that Great Tusk is on all the teams. So why then, going back to the unique Pokemon, why are the unique Pokemon so important? I think in large part because these unique Pokemon are going to have unique restrictions on your team building. So it's taken a long time to finally get to the crux of my thesis, but here it is. If we look at Garganacl has Salt Cure. That's forcing Pokemon like Golden Go or like Corviknight to run a Covert Cloak. Now, if it weren't for that, if it weren't for Garganacl's Salt Cure, nobody would run Covert Cloak because it's not a very good item currently, because there's no Scald, and really they're only running it for Garganacl only. So that really tells you how Garganacl, with its unique ability and unique move, have warped the metagame to fit it. Baxcalibur is a weaker example on this list, but it does bear mentioning just because that thermal exchange ability is really scary. It also has Glaive Rush, which technically is unique because it is just so strong, right? 120 base power, you're not locked in like you would be with Outrage. So it does have some unique stuff, but it's less important. Clodsire is a pretty passive Pokemon and isn't something that the metagame hasn't seen before. But if you're not prepared for Unaware Clodsire, right? You forget about that Unaware, and all of a sudden your setup team isn't going to be able to function if it can't break through Clodsire or Skeledirge. Golden Go is another big one. If your Defogger or your Rapid Spinner can't deal with Golden Go, or maybe, like Corviknight's a Defogger, if you don't have something that your Corviknight can U-turn out into and deal with Golden Go, then Golden Go is going to be an extremely annoying Pokemon, specifically because it has good as gold, right? Glamora is another really annoying Pokemon if you don't have special attackers that can attack it without getting up those toxic spikes, especially if you didn't have good hazard removal, or maybe your hazard removal is like a Toedscruel, and your Toedscruel is going to have to come in and get poisoned from the toxic spikes before it can remove it. You could run Heavy Duty Boots, but also it's a Toedscruel. Not going to take. It's going to resist Stealth Rock damage, so you might not want to run Heavy Duty Boots on your Toedscruel specifically. Not the greatest example. Maybe you have a Great Tusk as your Rapid Spinner. That also maybe doesn't want to run Heavy Duty Boots. It wants to run Rocky Helmet or Assault Vest. It's going to be poisoned by toxic debris unless you were able to effectively attack the Glamora with a special attacker, which requires certain kinds of Pokemon, right? King Gambit is a pretty scary endgame Pokemon if you don't have something on your team specifically to deal with this combination of Iron Head Sucker Punch, which is a really difficult combination to try to deal with because the Iron Head deals with fairies, this deals with just about everything else, and fighting types don't resist Iron Head. So have fun with this, then you're going to have a bad time if you can't deal with this in the endgame. Because it's a very common Pokemon. Shedtail on Earthworm is a really problematic Pokemon. If you have something like Infiltrator Dragapult, then you're good to go, right? Earthworm can only really heavy slam you, and you can just come in on the expected Shedtail. You can Infiltrator hit the Pokemon that comes out and hopefully kill them. That is an option. But if you don't have something like that, then if they get a free Shedtail into a setup sweeper like Roaring Moon, all of a sudden now they're +1, they Terastallize into something, they beat your entire team, and it was because you didn't have anything for Earthworm. Walking Wake is a stupidly annoying Pokemon because it has really strong moves and really enables Sun and even Rain teams to just bust through stuff, especially because it's so powerful. And Dragonite is another Pokemon that if I want to prepare for it, I have to have a Ghost type on my team, right? If you have a Ghost type, like Dragapult, to some extent you can deal with it. If you have a Pokemon like a physically defensive Dondozo, then Dragonite can't do anything to it. Rotom Wash is another pretty good Pokemon, although less so with Terra Normal Use Speed. But those are some options, right? You can deal with these Pokemon, but if you want to deal with this Pokemon specifically, then you have to bring Dondozo or Rotom Wash or Toxapex with the Terra Ghost or something, right? Right? Though those will work, but you have to bring something specifically for this because it wasn't going to be like useful as much for other things, I guess. Rain teams in general can really knock your team down if you aren't specifically prepared for rain. And Trick Room or Healing Wish can also be very annoying. And of course, Magic Bounce is annoying for anybody who relies on hazards. So these unique Pokemon require unique strategies to counter them. And that means that if you don't have those unique counters in your current team, then it's going to be a lot harder for you. But there's so many of them. Right, this isn't an exclusive list. We could talk about Armarouge and Psychic Spam. We could talk about Greninja, I suppose, if you wanted to, or any number of the Quark Drive or Photosynthesis Pokemon in their respective terrain or sun, and Pokemon like Tinglu or even Wo-Chen, which are really fat and annoying and could be hard for your team to break depending on how you built it. And so all of these unique Pokemon, you have to think about, how am I going to deal with these Pokemon? Now I want to compare, I want to go into this first. So let's look at the Pokemon that got banned. Out of the Pokemon that got banned, were they unique? And they were. Annihilate has a unique typing that's very powerful, as well as having Rage Fist, which is an extremely powerful move, right? Rage Fist being a move that gets stronger as you get hit more, which means as you try to beat down Annihilate, it's actually going to get stronger and stronger very quickly, in fact, plus 50 base power. After one hit, it becomes the strongest ghost move in the game. So, very scary Pokemon. Cyclizar has, again, that access to Shed Tail, which makes it extremely valuable for teams, as well as a bevy of utility moves and Regenerator, meaning that it's uniquely placed to get off 2 or 3 Shed Tails in a game. Much better than Earthworm. Houndstone wouldn't be that good except for it has Last Respects. And Last Respects is another one of those moves that requires you to have something on your team specifically for it. Right? In this case, you actually have to have something that's a normal type. If you have a normal type, in the end, then you don't have any problem with Last Respects, Houndstone sweeping you. That's not an issue. But if you don't, then it becomes an issue. So are you going to specifically run a normal type on your team for this Pokemon? That's something you have to think about. Palafin, of course, was a big problem at the beginning of the game. And just the fact that it could come in and be really strong with Jet Punch. And even special sets were annoying as well. And then, of course, the Spatra. The Spatra being a very annoying Pokemon with Terra and with the stored power. Speed Boost. Speed Boost, of course, is a very unique ability that isn't new to this generation, but in pretty much all previous generations, Speed Boost Pokemon usually end up getting banned, right? You got Blaziken, which until very recently was banned to Ubers. You have Scolipede, which is perennially in the UUBL or even RUBL tier, because it always gets banned from whatever tier that it's in. And the tier above will have a counter to it, like Skarmory. So, because the Spatra with Terra types doesn't have a counter, especially with stored power, then it got banned to Ubers. So all of these things are doing stuff that are entirely unique. If we look at the rest of the Ubers tier, we have Chien-Pao and Chi-Yu. These two Pokemon actually are not very unique because their abilities don't give them any special effects. What I would say these Pokemon are just stat Pokemon. They took the best stats they needed, right? High speed, high attacking stats, and just amped them up to 11. That's another form of power creep, but it isn't something that's necessarily unique. They don't have signature moves that are busted. They don't have a signature ability that does anything beyond just amp up their stats, right? If we took Sword of Ruin and turned his attack stat into 175 or whatever it is, that would be exactly the same. Turn this into 190 base power, it's exactly the same. And then it was like they have no ability at all. Fluttermane is a photosynthesis mon, and so with that and Iron Bundle, those are unique abilities, but besides that, they aren't really any different. They're just really high stats and really well-placed stats. These, of course, are the legendaries. We don't have to worry about them. And so I'd say these are the ones that are the most unique, but they all have something that's really unique, and it was hard for teams to prepare for. I would have to have something specifically on my team to deal with most of these Pokemon or the strategies they enable. For instance, Cyclizar, I would have to have something that could deal with Shed Tail, not necessarily that could deal with Cyclozar itself. Let's consider some other Pokemon in the lower tiers that I also might have to prepare for if I am preparing a team or OU, because we know that in OU you can use lower tier Pokemon and that's still viable, or allowable rather, I should say. Viable, depends on where you are on the ladder. But Low Kicks, for instance, we know that it has the Choice Band First Impression set or any other variation on that theme. I have to worry about Tintalen's First Impression wrecking my face. So, consider that as an option when you're building your team. Otherwise, you lose Low Kicks on Team Preview. And then you say, well, how was I supposed to see that one coming? Nobody runs Low Kicks. Well, it doesn't matter if nobody runs it. It's your fault for not preparing for it, right? Mousehold, of course, everybody was hyped about the Population Bomb Technician Wide Lens set. And that's basically the only good single set that I know of for Mousehold. But if your team doesn't have a Rocky Helmet user, doesn't have a normal immunity to it, or is generally slower, then you can potentially lose to Mousehold. Again, you didn't prepare for it, and that's your fault. Right? It's another unique thing that only this can do. And if you're not thinking about Mousehold, and you don't have something for it. So, we got Mimikyu, an old favorite from Gen 7, I suppose. But it does have a unique ability in Disguise, which allows it to get a free setup. Now, Mimikyu isn't necessarily the strongest Pokemon, but it definitely is something to consider, because it does have that free setup and has priority. So it can be sort of annoying. A Pokemon that maybe isn't as annoying is Bellibolt. Bellibolt has the Electromorphosis ability, which can be pretty annoying to deal with, and it does have recovery. Right? It has Slack Off, and it's got the ability to be either physically or especially defensive. And Electromorphosis, it works on any hit, so it doesn't have to be a physical or a special one. It just works on anything. Pretty unique. Stelazlo is another old Pokemon that has Corrosion, and as anybody who's played in either Ranbats or in lower tiers in previous generation knows that Corrosion plus Subtoxic and Flamethrower can be really annoying if your team's not prepared for it. Otherwise, Stelazlo just comes in, toxics everything. You don't have Heal Bell or Aromatherapy in this gen, and I can just sit there and be annoying and completely stall out your team. Finally, we got Palmot here, and Palmot, of course, has the Revival Blessing ability, or I should say move, and can even earn a Lepid Berry with it, so that it can heal 2 Pokemon 50% HP. And that's really strong. And maybe not as strong as people were thinking originally, but it is still decently strong. I'd say this is one maybe you don't need to prepare for as much, because this doesn't actually give the team any new strategies, except for maybe with Annihilate. It instead really just makes it so that the team can continue going on and maybe get a knockout or two, right? But it's something else that's unique that maybe you'd want to consider when building your team. And so when you're team building, you spread so thin throughout all of these different Pokemon that can do unique things. Let's go back to Gen 4 and consider just some cherry-picked examples. So if I have Blissey here, for example, Blissey has a moveset that looks something like this, right? You've got an attacking move, a couple of status moves, recovery move. Well, Clefable can also do that. Basically the same exact thing. This one has knockoff instead of Stealth Rock, but it's basically the same idea. And you could run Stealth Rock on it too, I think. How about Metagross? Metagross is an OU Pokemon. One of the lower tiers, you got Registeel. It does basically exactly the same thing, albeit without priority. I would say that there are very few Pokemon in Gen 4 that have a unique set of moves or abilities that actually make them stand out as being something that's irreplaceable and that you specifically have to prepare for. One of them I would say is Tyranitar. Tyranitar is a pretty oppressive Pokemon in some of the earlier generations of Pokemon, and especially after it got Sandstream, it got better, and then it got even better in Gen 4 because Sandstream buffed its special defense stat. And with the Pursuit move, you actually get something more unique because you do get Hippowdon in Gen 4, but Pursuit specifically on Tyranitar means that if you have a Psychic type or a Ghost type that is locked in and Tyranitar enters the field, that Ghost or Psychic type is basically dead. There's nothing they can do, and they're just going to have to die to Pursuit now. And that's a unique threat that you have to consider with Tyranitar. There are other pursuit Pokemon, but Tyranitar being a dark type makes it a little bit better. And then of course it has the sand, which makes it quite much better. Another unique Pokemon I would say is Jirachi. Jirachi specifically because it has its Terrain Grace ability and has the ability to either be fast or tanky, and the ability to flinch you down or to status you with freeze or para or whatever, just because it has a higher chance of happening from Serene Grace, which is really annoying, and not very many other Pokemon in the game can do it to that degree. So, for the most part, besides a few exceptions, I would say the majority of Gen 4, if we just look through it, the majority of Gen 4 has things that everybody else can do, right? Flygon has Outrage, Earthquake, Dragonite, similar kind of setup, right? Most of these Pokemon have not signature moves. Maybe they have a unique combination of moves, but they don't really have that many signature moves that only they can do and that are really, really good and define the metagame currently in Gen 4. Right? All of them have a shared move pool. We go back even further to Gen 2, well, okay, Snorlax has a stab move, it has a setup move, coverage move, and a recovery move. Raikou has a stab move, a coverage move, it has a phasing move, and it has a recovery move. Golem has a stab move, a support move, a phasing move, and has Explosion Last instead of recovery, I suppose. Sorry, Golem. Starmie has a stab move, another stab move, a recovery move, and a support move. Tyranitar has a stab move, a setup move, a phasing move, and a recovery move. Skarmory has a stab move, a recovery move, a phasing move, and a setup move. All of those were almost the same exact Pokemon. They were all having this same idea of just, I brought a stab, maybe one coverage option, I got a setup option maybe, or a phasing option, and then I've got some recovery option, usually is my last move. That's it. So at that point, it really just comes down to which is the best option, right? Do I want to run Snorlax, or do I want to run Kangaskhan or Clefable, right, as my normal type? Well, clearly Snorlax is better because it has better stats. It has a better move pool specifically for that normal type slot. Which Rapid Spinner do I want to run? Right, we got Golem, we've got Starmie, we've got Cloyster, Fortress, and it all just comes down to which typings you want. But basically, it's just all variations on a theme. There aren't really signature moves in this gen that are defining. Very few Pokemon in this gen, I would say, have any kind of signature move, and even ones that do, like Nidoking has Lovely Kiss or whatever. It's not really going to change and warp the entire metagame around it. But in this generation, in Gen 9, we have all of these Pokemon that have something specific, and it's not just something specific and weird. I would say Pokemon that are specific and weird would be something like Cinderace. Cinderace is Pyro Ball, and that's quite strong, not gonna lie. But just because I have Pyro Ball, that's just a fire move. There's nothing weird about this fire move besides, I guess, that it can thaw the user. Who cares about that, right? That doesn't mean anything. So I don't have to specifically prepare for Cinderace. If I look at a Pokemon like Hydreigon, Hydreigon has Terra types in this gen, which can be annoying, right? Especially if I Terra Steel. And this one doesn't have Flash Cannon. I don't know why it doesn't have Flash Cannon. Flash Cannon, and actually I'll put Earth Power here. Right, this is a little more annoying for Hydreigon just because it has the Steel plus Levitate. But really, that's not even particularly unique. It's just, here are some attacks that it gets in its move pool that all other Pokemon can learn. This isn't going to warp the metagame around it. It's only going to be really the Pokemon that can do unique things that are going to make it that your team building is that constrained. And I think that's the big key difference between this generation, Gen 9, and many of the previous generations. The number of unique abilities and unique moves that Pokemon can have that are so valuable that if your team isn't prepared to counter those abilities or moves, then they can just wreck your entire team. So this video got really long, but to distill this idea down, I would say that Game Freak is making a lot of Pokemon with unique mechanics that are very strong mechanics. And as a result, your team has to be able to deal with them. If your team isn't able to deal with them, then even if it would be a normally solid team against very many other Pokemon, if it just has that one weakness because you didn't bring Taunt, because you didn't bring a priority user, because you didn't bring a ghost type, then all of a sudden you can have a bad time. And I think that can lead to a lot of imbalances. If we look back at the Ubers tier, right? All these Pokemon just had something really unique to them, right? Rage Fist or Last Respects, or Palafin was just going to be busted no matter what I think. But it's Patra with the stored power, and they have something that's uniquely powerful. And if your team is prepared for it, it can be a problem. Even Espatra does have counters in the OU tier, right? You can bring in Skeledirge and beat Espatra 1v1 technically. But just because it has a counter doesn't mean that that's healthy for the metagame, where I have to be able to have a counter for every single unique threat. Whereas having counters for general threats, an example of that would be, okay, well, there's a bunch of water types. Let's look in the tier at water types. I've got Azumarill, I've got Dondozo, I've got Quaquaval, right? Those are some water types that are in the tier. Physical water types specifically. If I have a Toxapex, I've immediately counted all three of them. Boom, done. Like just out of hand, I know that all those water types are now beaten by my Toxapex, and that's just how it is. Because Toxapex is a bulky water type. So I can counter all of those Pokemon all at the same time as a result. But can Toxapex beat a bunch of these unique Pokemon, right? Toxapex is going to get Salt Cured. Toxapex could technically beat Excalibur if it isn't already +1, but if it is +1, it's just going to Glaive Rush or Earthquake you, and it's going to be bad. Can't beat Clodsire, right? I guess, just specifically Toxapex beating these things isn't necessarily the litmus test on what is broken or not. But the idea is that these things all come at you from different angles, and there's not necessarily a Pokemon that can deal with all of those angles all at once. And so not every team that you fight will have all of these Pokemon on it, of course not. But one team will have a couple of them, another team will have another couple of them, and if we look back at the usage stats, well sure, most teams will have Golden Go, or even King Gambit, so I can prepare for those, that's fine. But how many teams are going to have Glimmora? It's number 17 in usage. So maybe not as many teams. Number 29 is Earthworm. Oh, that's barely anything at that point. I don't even have to worry about these guys. But then, if it does show up, well, now all of a sudden you're screwed. Because you didn't prepare for that. It was low in usage, but you didn't prepare for it. And then you go to the lower tiers and you bring a Low Kicks or Mouse Holden. And you didn't prepare for that, and all of a sudden now you're in trouble. Alright. So this video got really rambly, but I think I'm going to leave it here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How to fix this? I don't think there is a way to fix it necessarily. I think Game Freak's design philosophy has shifted somewhat. They want to make these Pokemon a little more unique. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with giving Golden Go a unique ability, or giving Garganacl a unique ability. I think it's actually sort of cool. I do like Garganacl quite a lot, and I like Glimmora quite a lot, and a bunch of these other Pokemon, I really like them as Pokemon. But I do think it makes team building a unique challenge in Gen 9 that wasn't necessarily existing before, because all of these unique threats have specific things that you have to prepare for that no other Pokemon have. And if you aren't prepared for it, then every so often you're just going to get completely destroyed because you didn't get prepared for it. But there's not much we can do for it. I don't think banning Pokemon right-left is necessarily going to fix it until we ban all the unique Pokemon and then they all go to Ubers. But I don't really think that's a good solution either. But yeah, like I said, this video is getting too long, so we're going to call it here. I'll catch you guys next time.